7 countries are flashing the same warning signal right now. Not the same politics, not the same culture, not the same level of poverty, the same financial pattern. Debt gets too heavy, the currency begins to weaken, reserves drain, interest costs rise. Then the government faces the choice every indebted country eventually faces: tell the truth and accept pain now, or print time and make the final pain larger. That is the real story. Most people hear a countdown like this and assume it is about weak countries far away. That is the comforting mistake. 3 of these countries are not small peripheral economies. One is close to the European system. One is the 3rd largest economy on earth. And one is the country whose currency almost every investor still treats as the safest place to hide. So this is not a list of broken countries. It is a map of how money loses trust. The warning system has 3 lights. The first is debt above 90% of GDP. That does not mean instant collapse. It means the country has crossed from flexible to constrained. Every shock becomes harder to absorb. The second is reserve pressure. Foreign exchange reserves are the national emergency fund. When they fall too fast, the government cannot defend the currency or comfortably pay for imports. The third is political surrender. It appears when leaders stop respecting monetary discipline, they subsidize what they cannot afford, pressure the central bank, weaken the currency, or pretend that printing money can fix a debt problem. When all 3 lights flash together, the crisis is no longer theoretical. Number 7 is Bangladesh. Bangladesh matters because it was a success story. It lifted millions out of poverty. It became the 2nd largest garment exporter in the world. Western brands depended on its factories. Growth stayed strong for years. Then the weak point appeared. The pandemic hit exports. The energy shock doubled the fuel bill. A stronger dollar made dollar debt harder to carry. Suddenly, the country that looked like a development miracle had to defend its reserves just to keep the machine running. Foreign exchange reserves fell from roughly $46 billion to under $21 billion in about 18 months. That is the emergency fund being cut in half. Factories began losing power for long stretches because the government could not afford enough fuel to keep the grid stable. The debt ratio is still low, around 39% of GDP, which is why Bangladesh is number 7, not number 1. But low debt is not immunity. It is borrowing capacity. And borrowing capacity becomes dangerous when it is used to delay the real repair. A country with low debt and collapsing reserves is not safe. It is early in the cycle. Number 6 is Egypt. Egypt is not just another stressed economy. Egypt controls the Suez Canal. It imports a huge share of its wheat. It has more than 100 million people. It sits on the line between food, energy, trade, and political stability. Debt has moved above the 90% warning line. The pound has been devalued repeatedly. IMF programs have come again and again. Each rescue brings conditions. Each condition creates pain. Each round of pain makes the next rescue harder to accept. The most important word in Egypt is not debt, it is bread. Bread subsidies are part of the political contract for decades. The state has kept food affordable because it knows what happens when basic survival becomes too expensive, but subsidies require money. Wheat imports require dollars. A weaker currency makes those imports more expensive. Higher prices make subsidy cuts more dangerous. That traps Egypt between foreign creditors and its own population. Pay the debt or protect the street. That is the kind of choice countries reach when the math is no longer hidden. Egypt has 2 warning lights flashing: debt above the danger line and reserve pressure. The 3rd warning, full monetary surrender, has not completely arrived, but the pressure is moving in that direction. Number 5 is Pakistan. Pakistan is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The country has gone to the IMF more than 20 times since 1958. One rescue can be a crisis. More than 20 rescues are a structure. Debt is near the 90% danger line. Reserves once fell to less than a month of imports. Interest payments have consumed more than half of federal revenue. That last number is the key. When more than half of government revenue goes to interest, the country is no longer mainly funding the future. It is paying for the past. The trap is brutal. Pakistan needs energy. Energy requires imports. Imports require dollars. When global energy prices rise, the government either passes the pain to citizens or subsidizes the difference. It often subsidizes. The subsidy becomes debt. The debt creates interest. The interest consumes revenue. Then there is less money to build the energy infrastructure that would reduce the next import shock. Pakistan may survive the next round because it has survived many rounds before. But survival is not repair. Each rescue that does not fix the machine becomes part of the machine. That is why Pakistan is dangerous. It is not only short of money, it is short of escape routes. Number 4 is Turkey. Turkey is the warning that should disturb people in developed markets. Turkey is not a primitive economy, it is a G20 country. It has banks, industries, exports, and real institutions. And still, monetary credibility was damaged in less than 2 years. Inflation surged. The lira collapsed against the dollar. Families who thought they were saving in normal money discovered that the currency itself had become the risk. The cause was not simply war or oil. The cause was political interference with monetary policy. When inflation rises, a central bank normally defends the currency with tighter policy. Turkey did the opposite for too long. Political leadership insisted that high rates caused inflation, even as markets sold the lira and prices kept rising. That is the lesson. A country can have institutions and still destroy trust if politics overrules money at the critical moment. Turkey later moved back toward more orthodox policy. Rates were raised aggressively. Inflation came down from the worst levels, but the damage remained. Once people learn that the currency can be sacrificed for politics, they do not forget quickly. Turkey shows the mechanism in real time. Bad monetary policy destroys credibility fast. Correct policy rebuilds it slowly. Number 3 is Argentina. Argentina is what happens after the warning signs become national memory. Argentina has defaulted again and again. It has frozen bank accounts. It has broken currency promises. It has taught its own citizens not to fully trust the local system. The 2001 crisis is the template. For years, Argentina held the peso to the dollar. The peg created confidence until the fiscal math underneath stopped working. Deficits continued, debt rose. The IMF demanded austerity. Austerity produced social pain. Social pain froze politics. Then the system snapped. The government froze bank accounts. Dollar deposits were converted into pesos at an official rate that did not match reality. Savers lost a large part of their real purchasing power. That is what sovereign crisis means. It is not just a market crash. It is the rulebook changing while ordinary people sleep. Today, Argentina is trying a radical repair spending cuts, ministry closures, a primary fiscal surplus. Maybe it works, but the cost is immediate. Inflation remains severe. Poverty rises as spending gets cut. The country is attempting to rebuild trust. After decades of breaking it, Argentina is high on the countdown because it knows the end game too well. It may survive again, but every survival comes with scars. Number 2 is Japan. Japan is the elegant trap. Its debt to GDP is around 263%. By normal standards, Japan should have broken long ago. It did not because Japan owes most of its debt to itself. Domestic institutions hold most Japanese government bonds, the central bank, pension funds, insurers, banks, and savers. That closed loop prevented a simple foreign creditor panic. But a closed loop is not a free lunch. For years, Japan survived because interest rates were near zero. Huge debt was manageable because the cost of carrying it was tiny. Then inflation returned. That created the contradiction. Raise rates to defend purchasing power, and the government must pay far more to service 263% debt to GDP. Keep rates too low. And the yen weakens while inflation erodes real wealth. One path hurts the bond market, the other path hurts the currency. Japan is not likely to collapse in a dramatic Argentina-style weekend. Japan shows something subtler: what happens when a rich country postpones adjustment for decades until even small changes become dangerous. If rates normalize to even levels other countries would call low, debt service could overwhelm tax revenue. That is why Japan is number 2. It proves that rich countries can hide a debt crisis longer than poor countries, but not erase it. Number 1 is the United States. This is the part people resist. The United States is not Pakistan. It is not Argentina. It has the reserve currency, the deepest bond market, the most powerful military, the largest capital markets, and unmatched financial privilege. All true. And still, the math is moving in the wrong direction. The United States now spends more on interest on the national debt than on national defense. That is not a normal line. That is a stage change. Defense is the cost of power. Interest is the cost of yesterday. When yesterday cost more than power, the system has entered a different phase. Debt to GDP is above the 90% warning line. Long-term projections point much higher. Deficits continue even in periods that are not depressions or world wars. Political leadership has little appetite for the kind of cuts or taxes that would change the path. The dollar gives America time. The world needs dollars. Central banks hold dollars. Trade is priced in dollars. Treasury bonds are still treated as the deepest safe asset, but time is not the same as safety. The United States can borrow longer than anyone else. It can export some of its pressure because the dollar is the center of the system, but privilege can weaken. It weakens when interest consumes more of the budget. It weakens when foreign holders diversify, weakens when inflation becomes a quiet method of reducing debt. It weakens when the rest of the world starts asking whether the safest asset is only safe because everyone is afraid to leave at the same time. The United States is number one, not because it collapses first. It is number one because if trust weakens there, every other country feels it. Dollar funding gets more expensive, global rates rise, weak currencies fall faster, commodity importers get squeezed, governments with dollar debt face higher pressure, the entire system tightens because the dollar is the system. So which country falls first? If we mean near-term sovereign crisis, Pakistan and Egypt are the most exposed. If we mean repeated currency trauma, Argentina remains dangerous. If we mean the quiet bond market shock, no one wants to discuss. Japan is the one to watch. But if we mean the country whose deterioration changes the rules for everyone, the answer is the United States. That is not a prediction of collapse tomorrow. It is a warning about trajectory. Debt crises do not come from one bad year. They come from years of decisions that make the next bad year impossible to absorb. The countdown is not really about 7 countries. It is about one pattern. And once you see the pattern, you stop asking which country has the ugliest headline today. You start asking which country is running out of credible choices. That is the country that falls first.